Nation. I'm really excited because we got a great guest here today. It's Frank. This is going to be a great episode because there's so much to talk about in this realm of. We're going to talk about some sci-fi. We're going to talk about some AI. We're going to talk about some deep mysteries of human culture, religion, and everything. It's going to be really fun. It's so interesting. So let's kick it off. Dead Nation putting death out of business. Frank, just explain to the audience who you are. We've seen you on the show before. You've come on. We had a great panel with you before. Just explain to the people who you are, what you like to do, and we'll kick this off.
My name is Frank. Okay, sorry. I'm mostly like I've been passionate about transhumanism since around like 2003, 2004. Uh, I'm mostly like I went to school mostly for art. I'm a science fiction nerd, obviously, and kind of like I have high functioning Asperger's, so I kind of like over obsess with one subject longer than most people do, and I overanalyze stuff. So I'll just like, so usually the thing is, it's like for me, it's mostly like comic books and cartoons 24/7 inside my head, other than science. But like mostly for like, and then like I'm mostly what I'm on disability right now due to health issues. So that's kind of gotten in the way of like wanting to be more involved in stuff that relates to science. But mostly my interest is in transhumanism and also like studying religions and mythology and atheism. Mostly like one of the things that I tend to do is just like study religion in order to try to figure out how to explain stuff in it or to debunk it. And I also like kind of started studying films and movies and started noticing how they like make parallels to things in religion. And even like basically like with transhumanism, it's also mostly science fiction that gave me the idea of it as a kid before I knew that there was like an official movement for it or an official idea for it. Especially like, back in the 80s, like, you don't have no internet. You're not going to hear about anything like that, right? And just like when I was a kid, I used to just think like, like you could like use genetic engineering to improve your body in some sort of way, but just wouldn't know how you would do it. And I'd be thinking about these things already from like the age of 14 or 15 on my own, like, and I just thinking like, one day that has to like be possible, like that you could actually do something like that.
Yeah,
And
that's a very talented mind. That's an active mind. I like it, and I sympathize with your love of pop culture, science fiction culture, science fiction and comics and all that. I'm the same. I endorse that a lot. I think it's great, and we both have a passion for Star Wars, which I think is great because I enjoy Star Wars. I think Star Wars is, I mean, not this new Disney rubbish. I mean, and I don't think that's like an old person, cranky old person thing. I think it's been a flop. I think everybody across the board has thought of the new Disney. I don't think there's much energy out there. I think a lot of it's bought energy. And sometimes I wonder, hey, what do you reckon? Sometimes I wonder whether or not Lucas sold it to Disney to undermine Disney, like a Palpatine move or something. What do you reckon? Like to crash
I
Disney?
think he just was tired of working on it. And I think he's just probably getting old and probably family, like, wasn't interested anymore. I agree that they've done a lot of bad execution in the new trilogy, but I don't think it's because of like the concepts and ideas that they're trying to work with. I think it's just that they they made Ray powerful without explaining why.
Mary Sue.
It, yeah, and then they watered down Luke a little too much. And then the problem with the villains is they fit with what is going on politically right now, just as much as how the original trilogy was dealing with the Vietnam War and the Nixon era. But the problem is that the older films, it's like, you'd get like a classical actor to play Obi-Wan Kenobi, and you'd get a classical actor to play someone like Tarkin. You have someone like General Hux, he doesn't come off as compelling. And then like a character like Kylo Ren, they haven't decided what his motivation is, and he's confused between the light and the dark. And it's like, and he fits like most of the guys today who are angry at society and everything. And the problem is that it just does not come off as compelling as Darth Vader.
Mm.
Because you don't know who Darth Vader is, first off. Secondly, it's like, okay, yes, he is portrayed as a very evil character, but he's past that point of being like whiny, like when they portray him in those prequels where he's young. And so it's like, and also Vader, even though he was an evil person that was willing to like just kill anyone, like, he'd probably kill his own grandmother, but he had like a set of morals. And usually the most compelling villains, they think that what they're doing is right. But Kylo Ren is more like a guy with a complex where he wants to be more powerful than his grandfather, and he always gets angry and he has like no self-control. And it's like you just don't find this compelling because it's like, I don't know, like they have to make you like the villain on some level, even if the villain is a terrible person. Like with Palpatine, he has no likable traits. But the issue is that Palpatine is funny, so you just kind of overlook it. Vader, it's like more that Vader has this like serious sensibility to himself, like as if he still values something even though he does evil things. So people just look over the fact that he's evil. But with Kylo Ren, you're just like, it just sounds like as if he's angry because a girl didn't want to go out with him. Like that. That's what it looks like.
Yeah.
I mean, like it doesn't mean that he's a bad character. It's just like it doesn't feel like they gave him a good motivation for being on the side of the bad guys. And then it's like, you feel like, okay, but how am I supposed to like hate the guy but also feel sympathetic towards him and understand why he's the way he is?
Yeah.
And is there anything compelling? And so the problem is, I think that they just didn't find a way to make the characters feel as compelling as the characters in the original trilogy. I think that that's what the problem is. I don't think it's like, that everything that they're doing in it is bad. I think some stuff is disappointing.
What did you think about them throwing canon out, like when they demolished canon? Did you rue that day? What did you think about that?
Well, I don't like that because I think that the novels and the comic books, in some ways, were better than the films because they were able to build up upon things and explain stuff and even like do stories that could like deal with a lot more issues that you cannot handle in a Hollywood film. But I understand why they do that because they don't want to go through all the work to read every single novel to figure out if they're going to contradict something. I think Lucas did the same exact thing when he was doing the ones about Anakin being a kid. So the thing is that they want to simplify things. I think that the real problem, though, is that because you have people invested in the original 3 films, you're doing these new films, but there's no explanation as to why there's no more Empire. There's no explanation as to why the Republic is falling apart, even though the Rebels won. Why is this First Order? That would not have mattered if you were watching the original films. And then it's like, they kill Snoke so right away. But the issue is they'll say, oh, but the Emperor is only introduced in one movie, and he was a hologram before that, and they killed him too. But the thing was, you didn't have the level of development of a continuity at that time. And secondly, it felt like there still was more context given to the Emperor before they kill him. Where in this, it just feels like he's just suddenly killed, and you're just like, okay, like, it's fine that they killed him, but it's just like they just did it in a way where it's like he wasn't developed. It's almost like as if they're trying to make fun of the original films and say, we think that this character was introduced with no development, and they just did like a cheesier version of what was done in the original movie.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah, it's a mess. And what, I like what you said. Like, how would you have, if you were given the role of dictating the story from the outset, how would you have done that? I have my own ideas, but how would you have done that? If you're now in charge, this is episode 8 or whatever, episode 7. I mean, what would you have done?
well, if they gave more exposition and context to Snoke as a character and how he was like trying to spy on both of them and everything and what he was doing and what he thought he could get Kylo Ren to do before that event happened, it would have made a lot more sense. Because he was spying on both of them, and then I think he was going to use the situation as a way to test his apprentice, and then the guy just thinks, oh, fuck this, I'm going to kill this guy. But it's like, it's the way they threw it in that made it not make sense. If they, like, gave more, like, context, like, he only tears at General Hux, and then he yells at Kylo Ren saying, like, you're just like a little kid, right? You're trying to pretend to be Darth Vader. And then suddenly it's like, they do that whole scene. Like, they didn't give you enough context to understand that what's going on is that he's trying to anger Kylo Ren to be more ambitious. So that way he can get him to act like the apprentice he wants. They don't explain all of that correctly. And then, like, they just have Kylo Ren suddenly kills him, but you don't have an explanation as to why he wants to kill him so suddenly like that. So it's just like you're watching it and you don't get it because you're going to be confused. Because it actually does make sense if you're thinking of the fact that he was spying on them. He's setting them up to interact with each other so he could test his apprentice. He tore the shit out of the guy on purpose, right? And that then Kylo Ren's thinking, you know what, screw this. Why do I'm just going to kill the guy now. Forget it. Like, I don't need to learn anything from him anymore. And, like, a lot of people are going to think, okay, how come it was so easy for him to do it? Like, wouldn't this guy know that it was going to happen and would have stopped it before it was going to happen? That was another issue in that scene that was a problem. But I think that would have been more forgivable if you had, like, a context as to why those events were happening. And, even, like, his relationship with Rey is not really properly explained, so you don't get why he would kill Snoke in order, like, he did it to overthrow him, but it's also like as if he's doing it because he's torturing her in front of him as a test or something like that. And that he just doesn't want to be part of this test, but they don't explain it. Like, and that's why it's confusing. Then another thing a lot of people have argued is that the first movie had put in a lot of mysteries. So when this guy was directing it, he didn't know where to go with it. And he's trying to work with what J.J. Abrams gave him and probably just decided that he would do his own thing. And so it just becomes all confusing. It's like they're trying to break paradigms by having that, instead of having that the old guy who's the big boss is always in charge, like he gets gotten rid of suddenly as a surprise. But the problem is it just fell flat because it came out of nowhere with no explanation. That's what I think the problem was.
Yeah. There's problems there, and I would have scrapped the whole thing, and what I would have done is I would have had Luke and Leia essentially in a palace somewhere, ruling over, like, completely just tear up the storyline. I would have had them ruling a new republic. Ruling a new republic. They're on a building campaign. the Empire in retreat, burning worlds, as they retreated back to the core, um, you know, and probably pushing them out into wild space, and then you could introduce a Thrawn type character, and
Right.
I would have had the Empire on the back foot. I mean, it wasn't about a rebellion so much. They wanted to repeat that, zealous rebellion feel, but the Republic had won. It was supposed to be about the
Right. Right.
Republic.
Exactly. Like that's another thing too. Is like what you said is what most fans wanted to see.
Yeah. And that wasn't
Everyone
going
who
to
had
ruin
talked
it. It wasn't going to be boring. It was going to be there was going to be a lot of action. Them versus you could have also thrown in there the grand moffs of the different sectors who were fighting each other as the Empire fractures even more and working together to push back against this expanding republic. And then you could also have. The Sith taking advantage of coming from the outside, taking advantage. You could have had the Hutts, also doing something else. You could have had a lot more grand strategic play than this little ballet thing that they tried to do.
Right. That's what like even like one of my brothers said the same thing. He said everything exactly what you just said.
Yeah,
Like like even that's another thing too. Why like I came up with the argument that it would have made more sense that the the Sith had somehow come back as a religion,
yeah.
and that
Why
Kylo
not?
Ren was not a Sith, that he was actually one of Luke's students, but just probably saw that like Luke and the Jedi Order was not dealing with stuff properly.
Hmm.
Kind of similar to like most of the stories with Knights of the Old Republic with what's his name, the most of the characters that went to go fight the Mandalorian Wars.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah. Not Bane.
Revan.
Revan.
Yes,
Darth Revan. Or
Revan and
Revan.
Malik. Like where like the Jedi usually will the Jedi are like basically apathist space monks.
Yeah.
Like okay, Luke was supposed to change that on some level, but not 100%, because the context is that like okay was like from what I've watched on videos explaining stuff in Star Wars is that the Force had actually allowed the Emperor to win. Because even though the Force does not want there to be dark side users, like they'll basically explain that like they talk about balance and it confuses people because they think it means a balance between the light and the dark.
Mm.
But it actually means that there's not supposed to be any Force users. I mean, dark side Force users. So it's pretty funny because every time I talk to like religious people, they say, "Oh, the Force is witchcraft and everything," right? And I'm laughing because I'm thinking like the Force acts like they're saying that the Force is evil, like like witchcraft because it has a
It's
light
just
side and a dark side.
midichlorians. It's just
Right.
cells.
Yes, the midichlorians allow them to access the Force, to use it. But it's
Hmm.
a force in the whole galaxy. It's like an energy that pervades the galaxy. Like the thing I'm just trying to say though, technically what the Force is really doing is it gives people free will, lets them choose what they want to do, but it has its own plan. So now it's like it sees a bunch of people using the dark side. It doesn't like that. So it sees someone like Palpatine and wants to get rid of him. But the problem is it needs Palpatine to do what it needs to do, even though it has to get rid of him. So it's kind of like, I start laughing because I say to myself, wait a minute, isn't this the same thing as Christianity? Like, they'll say that it's not. They'll say that it's not. But when you technically think about it, like, so what they're doing in Star Wars is that the Jedi basically started becoming too political. They were involved in the Senate. They were not really serving the Force.
Mm.
And they're like a bunch of apathist space monks who think that they always know what the right answer to everything is. So the problem is that the irony here is that the strict rules that they had are what they're supposed to adhere to because it's the only way to not join the dark side. But the problem was that they had become inflexible because they didn't have to face any Sith for 2,000 years. So they didn't change or grow. The Sith Order had kept changing because they would always lose. Or they would always start to turn against each other.
Yeah.
So then what happened was that the Force had decided that the Jedi had to die in order for things to change. So basically what it did was it gave Palpatine what he wanted and then got rid of him at the last second. Like, so then basically it's like, you know, with most of the stuff in Star Wars, it's basically like you have that the Jedi cause people to turn to the dark side, even though they have to follow these rules anyways, because that's the only way to not turn to the dark side. Because it's kind of like they can't give in to emotions, they can't give in to desires. They have to be like apathist space monks. So what do they teach their students? Oh, you know, we're not supposed to care about conflict until it reaches a certain level that we have to become involved, right? So if they were going to do a new trilogy, Luke should have been like slightly different, but the problem is that he would have to also follow those rules as well, because even if he made the Jedi Order become more simple and more flexible and not as like strict on rules like the older Jedi Order, he would still have to follow those rules on some level, because that would be the only way you could prevent people from turning to the dark side. So the issue is that the same things would happen anyways. You know, it would just happen maybe not as badly, but it would still happen. You would still have that the Jedi would come to think the same exact way like they fought before. And that then what would happen is that, like, you know, you'd have Jedi saying, wait, like, why are we doing nothing? Why are we not, like, going to do this to solve this problem, right? And that could be a perfect explanation for people turning over to the dark side. Because that's usually like how it happens. Like, you know, either it's like they, you know, they can't really stop people from turning to the dark side.
See, the Sith have kind of a natural culling mechanism, because they get so aggressive, so angry, so power hungry that they just wipe themselves out. And the Sith civil wars, you know, they went on for generations and generations, and they could barely unite to attack the Republic. I mean, it took Vitiate like all of his power to like, and thousands of years to like build up enough momentum to like get the Sith together. But as a natural entity, the Sith have a natural sort of culling mechanism, which the Jedi don't. The Jedi just don't. Themselves. The Jedi just proliferate and proliferate and proliferate, and they don't stop. And the thing about the Jedi is, like, you have, you know, sort of more extreme like Yoda types, but you also have these like gray and dark Jedi as well. And the Force doesn't want that. The Force doesn't like that, because it's like within that bandwidth. But those dark and gray Jedi are like protected by the Yoda types, because they say, oh, they could turn back. And that's also a problem.
Well, yeah, but if you notice, though, like a lot of the great Jedi, what happens to them is that they become cowards and they isolate themselves, because they end up realizing that the whole dichotomy between the light and the dark is flawed. They end up realizing that the Jedi Order is corrupt or screwed up or doesn't deal with things properly. So then what happens is they tend to distance themselves, and only a few of them continue to stay involved. And the thing is, like with Qui-Gon, for an example, he was still serving the light side. He just was a maverick. Like, he would break some of the rules, but like, you know, the problem is, though, is that then there's a division between how many of these rules are what the Force like expects, and how many are what the Jedi, like, you know, have fears of what will happen because of human nature. And that's why I was saying that they still had to follow these rules because of the issues of human nature. But at the same time, those rules are contradictory and flawed, because it's like, it's the only way you can deal with a certain problem, but it's also what causes the problem. So that's why, like, you know, let's say for an example, they start seeing the signs that Anakin would turn to the dark side, and they said nothing. Because it's like, if we go and we tell this guy off, he might get mad at us and try to kill us.
Yeah.
And then it will become our fault. So they have to ignore it. They have to pretend, oh, I don't see nothing, nothing's going on, like they know it's going on. They know it's going on, but they have to pretend that they don't see it.
Yeah, and that
And
game
so,
goes right up till the end, like with the big battle between Obi-Wan and Anakin. Even Obi-Wan is still at that moment trying to pretend, oh, it's not true. Can't be true.
right, but in a sense, he's kind of like going against those rules, because if it was Yoda, it's like Yoda knows that it's going on, but would say nothing, wait until the other person does something bad, and then kill them in self-defense.
Mm.
So it's like saying that, like, you see, like, that basically, it would be like saying that guys like Mace Windu or Yoda, the higher up guys who like, they will just pretend it's not going on, because if they come in and start to prevent it, the guy might say, hey, they didn't want to teach me, they don't like me, they hate me, and then it'll happen earlier. So then it's like, what the hell are these guys supposed to do? And that's why in the films they look like they're stupid. They look dumb. Like, they look like they're dumb, like, that they don't understand what's going on. But in a sense, what it really is, though, is that they have to pretend that they have to pretend. Like, Obi-Wan, it's a little different because he's naive. He's like, it's like based on his emotion.
He's too close to the fire, yeah.
Right. It's like, this is like, it's like his brother or his son or something like that, and like, but for Yoda, it's like, it's not like that. Like, even like some of the stuff, like how they manipulated Qui-Gon Jinn to test one of his apprentices, because his apprentice was taken from an older age from a like rich family that was like a kingdom, and Yoda purposely sends him and the guy's son to the homeworld where the father rules the planet to settle, like, to do a diplomatic mission, because he wanted to test to see if the guy's son, like, if his like apprentice would turn to the dark side. Like, like, and you're just like, holy, like, it's like Yoda's trying to make a point, like, saying that you took, like, this guy was too old to really be trained, and if his loyalties lie more with his family, like, because his family was going to do a war, and, like, if he turns over to the dark side because of it, then Qui-Gon has to kill him. So it's like, it's like he's actually setting the guy up to kill his own student, and that's part of why Qui-Gon was not involved with the Jedi anymore. Because it's like, he's like thinking in his head, these guys are nuts. Like, and so, like, the thing is like, he still was, like, following the rules of the light side. He just didn't agree with their code of conduct and their, like, mentality, and, like, and dealing with Yoda's arrogance and all that stuff, right? Like, he's like thinking like, that they have to become so cold and robotic in order to follow their rules, that they become inhuman, even though they're like, they don't become inhuman in the same way like the Sith, but it's that they have to feel nothing. So it's like,
yeah,
Yoda
emotionless beings,
right,
devoid of
right,
anything.
right. And so then, like, that's kind of why, like, Luke was supposed to be, like, different, because he was following his intuition, right?
Mm.
Now, mind you, like, the stuff that happens where he convinces Vader to change is, like, something that probably would not happen, would not work with almost anybody else. If he was fighting some other Sith, that wouldn't happen. Probably wouldn't work. But like, but they portray him as not following the normal rules of the Jedi Order, because he was not trained and educated under their system, and he didn't understand how their system worked. And so he's just going, like, by instinct. So it's almost like as if the Force was, like, setting things up for someone who was not taught according to the Jedi rules to defeat the Emperor. Like, kind of thing. Like, like, it's kind of weird. I don't know, like, what the full intent was, but, like, it's kind of something like that.
I love it. I agree with you. I agree with you. I think Yeah, the wills, the wills are an amazing aspect of Star Wars, which just weren't expanded on, and I don't know if Disney is going to do it now. We'll see. But the wills were supposed to be, fundamental to Lucas's dream. I mean, that's what it is. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, the whole story of the Skywalker family and all that was supposed to be from some superdimensional wills TV show or something, in the future, and it's just something I hopefully, because these guys are the driving, they're driving the car, of the whole story.
Right.
Hopefully Disney talks about them and stuff. I also want to see. Do you want to see? I want to see Old Republic movies too. Do you?
I want to see that.
Everyone's excited for that. I want to see Darth Revan, Darth Malak. I want to see Sith Wars. I want to see, I want to see Vitiate. I mean, I want to see all of that. I'm super excited. There's so much packed into the Old Republic that it could just go on forever.
The only thing I'm scared of is if they screw up Kreia. I don't want them to screw that up.
Yeah.
Because the thing is that her character was designed to critique the game mechanics of the Star Wars universe.
I love Kreia too. She's amazing.
And so the whole thing is that the issue is that I'm scared that Disney would be afraid to use her to do the same stuff with her that they did in the games.
Yep.
Because it would expose how screwed up the Star Wars universe actually is.
Yeah, she's deep.
Right. Because the thing is like, the normal films and stories are portraying it as an adventure that you're watching and not portraying it from the perspective of a person who lives in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah.
What they were doing with her and her observations of everything, like philosophical observations, is how someone would see the universe of Star Wars if you lived in the Star Wars universe, understood how the Force worked, and ended up realizing that the same events happen again and again, but they just happen differently.
Yeah.
Like, like there's like that everything is going to be the same way. Like first you have the Jedi, like, then you have the Sith, then you have a war, then you have this, then you have that. And it's like, to any normal sane person, you're going to think this doesn't make any sense. Like it only makes sense because of the mechanics of how the light side and the dark side work. If it wasn't for the mechanics of the light side and the dark side, none of it would make any sense. Because it's like, like in the real world, it's not exactly the same. Like usually what we tend to consider good or evil doesn't follow the same rules as in Star Wars. So it's slightly different because a person can go into a rage tomorrow and beat a bunch of people up and then be calm for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
Because you don't have that you can actually connect to a force that you become addicted to, like a drug, because it's a power, and then you become addicted to using it, and that's what's happening with the Sith. They become addicted to the Force, and they have a philosophy that says that you gain freedom by gaining more power in the Force. So they religiously believe that they need to use the Force in order to stay free, so they have freedom. So the issue is that because of their beliefs, they become addicted to the power that they get. On top of the fact that they also have become addicted to it like a drug. Yeah. Right? So, of course, you're always going to have a one-dimensional good versus evil situation because it's like having a bunch of mutants and X-Men, that are telepathic or psionic, and they suddenly become addicted to their powers. You know what I mean? Like, instead of it being that they use their powers the wrong way, maybe only once or twice, and they don't become addicted to using it. Instead, in Star Wars, it's like the Force becomes a drug when you use the dark side. You become addicted to its power, and then you want to keep using it. That's actually what's happening. They're addicted to using the dark side. So it's like, it's not even the factor that the dark side is evil. It's the factor that what the Sith are doing is, where the Jedi are working with the Force, the Sith are grabbing the Force and beating it up in order to do what they want.
That's a
Right?
really, yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Which would explain why the Force wants to get rid of dark side users.
yeah.
Because it's like someone is forcing it to do what they want. Even though there might be like a bit of a dark side in the whole universe, right? But they're grabbing the Force and they're like making it do what they want. And so it's like, you notice, like, I don't know if this is connected. This is just hypothetical, how they age and they get sick because they keep using the dark side and they start to, like, physically deteriorate. Some people probably think, oh, it's because they're using hatred and anger. But then when you think of it, it's possible that it could even just be because of the way that they take the Force against its will and they use it, and they're also using more power than the Jedi use. They're actually fighting with the Force.
Do you think, what do you say on Palpatine slash, what do you think, was Palpatine, or Sidious, Darth Sidious, using a cloaking device in the first episodes, when he looked nice, and then they go up to the
They've confirmed that he wasn't hiding his face, that he actually did get burnt like that.
he got disfigured during the fight.
Yeah, that he allowed his own lightning to burn his own face. And that was part of one of the reasons why Anakin stayed loyal to him, was because he realized that the guy was willing to even allow his own face to be burnt in order to prove a point to him.
Mm.
So it's like, he's just thinking in his head, this guy was even willing to sacrifice his own physical appearance because he didn't even care or have a reaction at to what he looked like afterwards. So apparently, like, I thought it was that he was hiding his appearance too. That's what I thought too.
Yeah,
But
I thought that as well.
I've seen some videos that they've said that what happened was that he just basically actually did get burnt.
Okay, that's super interesting. What do you think of Darth Plagueis? Did you like that character?
Yes.
Yeah, me too.
What I've noted is that, and this is where it really connects to religion, is like, how like in Egyptian religion you have Osiris and Seth. Well, if you notice, and it's kind of strange because if you go to the original films, Vader is supposed to be Seth. Okay? Which makes it confusing. But if you notice, the relationship between Palpatine and Plagueis is similar to Osiris and Seth, because he says that, Plagueis could like bring people back from the dead, right? And Osiris was a god of death and regeneration. And Palpatine, if you notice, was not interested in really like he wanted to live forever for himself afterwards, but he didn't really care about trying to figure out how to make people live longer. He only cared about power. What he wanted was power. And so now the funny thing is that kind of gets into the thing of like, two rival gods who have a different viewpoint of like life and death. That if one god commands power and the other god commands like death and regeneration, is the god that commands power going to care really about being able to like live or die or like cure diseases for other people? Plagueis would probably he's a Sith, so he probably is still going to be greedy and selfish on some level. He's not going to like cure every single person who's ill, but he would have wanted to continue studying immortality much more deeply than Palpatine did. Like, some of the ideas in the films is that the reason why the Death Stars were actually built, because they were not like a smart strategic idea, was really so that way the Empire would have a symbol of power, so the Emperor could retreat from politics, so him and Vader could actually start studying the Force more deeply, so they could figure out all the secrets of immortality that Plagueis like figured out that the Emperor didn't know. And then maybe he knew some of it, like, it's possible that he could have killed Padme when she was giving birth, and that he knew like some of the stuff on how to like stop people from dying, but he just maybe didn't learn all of it because he could have just been one of those type of like sociopathic type of guys where his like master's like saying, hey, you know, I figured out how to do this. And he's just like, yeah, sure, whatever. You know, like
Yeah,
thinking, I don't want to.
I think they tried to make a point. Oh, have you gone?
No, I'm not gone. Sorry.
Yeah, I think they tried to make a point in the books, especially Darth Plagueis books, that you know Palpatine or Darth Sidious killed Plagueis prematurely on the fact
Right.
that it was a political move and that he didn't know.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what I'm getting at. And the thing is,
It was
is
premature. Like, he shouldn't have done it on an information level, on a knowledge level, on a wisdom level.
Right. And so, like, you know, this gets at what I'm trying to get at here, right? That when you technically think of it, like, you know, I mean, let's say for an example, like, in the Transformers, they have two gods who are like the two main gods of their whole like race. Like, you know, they have a guy called Primus and they have a guy called Unicron. And Unicron, basically, the only thing he wants to do is destroy the entire universe. And, like, you know, they portray Primus as a god who protects life. So now the thing is that it's kind of similar to the Osiris and Seth thing, but the thing is that if you notice something, Unicron has bull horns. And Osiris was associated with the constellation of the hunter, right? And so, like, you know, the Taurus bull stands in front of the hunter, right? So now if you think of it like, you know, nature versus mankind is like, nature decides that, oh, right now you have to die. Tomorrow you have to, like, you know, tomorrow you're going to starve to death, you're going to have disease, you're going to become ill, right? But humankind doesn't want to do that. They want the other way around. And so, of course, you know, a character like Unicron really actually represents the balance between life and death. Like, you know, he destroys everything, but that's what nature does. You know, like tomorrow a meteor will hit the earth and everyone will die. That's what Unicron technically is, right?
Yep.
So in a sense, like, you notice how Palpatine becomes the ruler of the whole universe, right? In a way, you know, if Star Wars is based on religion, you know, like they're saying that the Force is the actual creator, but that Palpatine has made himself into God, right? But he killed the God that can bring people back from the dead. So in a sense, it's like, you know, he's become like, you know, and then like, you know, I don't want to offend like Christians with this, but he's basically almost become like the Old Testament God, because he's like going around killing anyone who doesn't want to do what he says, and he uses a guy to go around executing people for him, right? And he destroys entire plans for not following his rules, right? All he does practically
he can't invoke life because he already burnt that bridge. And you know, and because the universe is a complex place and he doesn't have Sith hordes, he only has Darth Vader, who's not incredibly loyal, and we figured that out in 402.
Well, he did create life, though.
Oh, Anakin.
Yes. There you go. Just like, you know, the story of God, he goes to look for a woman who is good and pure to impregnate, right? And what does he do? He uses the Force, like, you know, with Plagueis' teachings to create Anakin. And then, like, you know, Plagueis ends up mistakenly assuming that Anakin was created by the Force in order to kill the Sith because of what they were doing. Because the thing was that Plagueis believed that if you rule the universe with too much of the dark side, which is what they wanted to do, like him and both Plagueis and Palpatine, they wanted to rule the universe through the dark side, like completely engulf the light side. That was what their ideas were, because the thing was that Darth Tenebris, who was Plagueis' master, both him and Plagueis, they didn't think of the Force as a form of magic like all the other Sith users, or like a religion. They looked at it like a science. And so they had come up with too many like complex ways of thinking of how to, like, you know, if the Force does this, you do this. If this happens like this, you do this. So the ideas of the Death Stars were Pelagius's idea because he had convinced Palpatine that if people keep resisting, or if the light side gets engulfed too much, what will happen is that the Force will create people, or start to manipulate people to rebel against us. So it's like, if some planet is going to suddenly have a kid who's Force sensitive suddenly start to rebel against the Empire, it's so much easier just to send the Death Star and just blow up the planet. But the thing is like in the story, it's like the Death Star did not make sense logistically, because it's like it would have just made more sense to have a larger military, but then you wouldn't have like a symbol of power to scare people, so you could spend all your time, studying the Force. And secondly, how are you going to like deal with a Jedi, like, some kid that suddenly learns the Force even though all the Jedi are dead, because he starts figuring everything out on his own, or the Force starts to manipulate him to train himself, and he starts accidentally figuring stuff out. And what if he's like, he's going to beat hundreds of people if he gets good enough at it, so just blow up the planet.
Yeah, and the universe at that point. I mean, Plagueis. Darth Sidious would have, probably went on a purge. I mean, he destroyed the library. He destroyed as much light side stuff. He probably, I'm not sure, I can't confirm this, but he probably would have put mandates in to limit, the material, censor the internet, the network,
right,
from
like
light side stuff.
yeah,
but I'm sure that in a cave somewhere there was light side material that had been stowed away by a Jedi. The Jedi were everywhere. It's not like anyone would have forgotten who they were. There was Jack Sabayoth or whatever. He was a crazy wannabe Jedi who was out there running around. There was like leftover remnants, the CIS remnants. I mean, there would have been people who there definitely could have, if there was someone smart enough or someone with just enough energy or information, they could definitely sort of train themselves to become a new Jedi for sure, without Obi-Wan or without Yoda.
Right. And so, like, you can kind of see how they kind of done a parallel with those films of how, like, I'm not sure if it was intended or on purpose, or if it's just coincidental. Because I don't fully think that they were intending, like, for Vader to fully really be like Jesus. I think that they're doing it more like, more like the Avatar or something like that, where like you have on this generation you have this Christ figure who's a warrior. The next generation it might be something else, like it might be a spiritual teacher or something, right? So the issue is like they're kind of portraying Vader as like a Nimrod type figure. But that he would be like the chosen one of that time period. So it's like if you were a Christian, you would say, "Oh, this guy is, he works for Satan. He's like the Antichrist. He's the devil, and like, but to that time period, it's like he's the guy who's in charge. You know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
Like, and it's like saying that, well, these people had a different religion at that time or a different set of beliefs. Like even if the stuff that was going on might not have been 100% morally right, but then in the end, it's like, Christian imperialism did the same exact thing.
Yeah.
And, it's like the Emperor, like everything the Emperor does in Star Wars is similar to Christian imperialism. Because they use a military, like, Palpatine sounds like Constantine. He looks like a pope. He has guys dressed in red like cardinals to protect him, right?
Yep.
They, like, if you go to the Basilica on the, where the Vatican is, they have the Star of Ishtar on the Basilica. And what's their weapon called? The Death Star. Like I'm not saying that they're necessarily saying it about Christianity. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like saying
George
that
Lucas,
like
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if George Lucas, he knows about Christianity. He lives in a Christian country. I'm sure he drew some inspiration from there when during his research. I mean, I'm sure you've written a book or had a dabble in writing or writing in your head or whatever. and you
But
do
the
research
killing,
and you go off on tangents when you're researching, and I'm sure he would have been like, did it at Vatican or reading through the encyclopedia or whatever he was doing in the 70s, 60s, 70s.
right? And the thing is, though, that the killing of the young ones, though, the younglings, like, you know, how Anakin kills the younglings, that's actually based off of one of the fictional stories about Nimrod. About how before Abraham was born, the guys who would predict the future told Nimrod that, like, a child was going to be born, like, you know, like that there would be a sign in the heaven that a child would be born that would overthrow him. So he started, like, killing all the, like, male children, and he even accidentally almost like takes a like female child from one family, and then when he realizes that he made a mistake, they give the child back and they give them the family all this money. You know, like it's not a real story, it's fictional, right? I don't think it was real, but it's like, you know, this is where they're stealing the idea of killing the younglings.
It's the same as Herod or King Herod in Jesus'
Right,
time.
exactly. And you notice that they repeated the same concept. Now it's King Herod who is killing the younglings.
Yeah, yeah,
When before it was Nimrod.
yeah.
Like, you know, and that's why I'm saying, like, you know,
The Bible does that. The Bible repeats itself over and over and over
right,
again.
right. So, like, when you start thinking about it, okay, like, you start realizing what they're doing in these, like, you know, stories, you start saying to yourself, why is it that they're over glorifying Jesus? Like, when Moses and Abraham had been the same thing? Because it would be like, you know, John the Baptist is the guy who predicts that Jesus will come, and then he gets sacrificed, and then you have Jesus. So then wouldn't Abraham be like the John the Baptist to, like, you know, to Moses?
Yeah, or what happened to Enoch? Enoch was so good that he was a man after God's heart, and he got taken up in a spaceship or something, you know what I mean?
Right, like he gets turned into an angel or something like that.
Yeah.
And they name him, like,
That's
they make him
basically the Yoda. That's Yoda, right? Right there.
right. Yeah. Like, you know, so it's like, you know, when you think about it, like, you know, so like my point of argument here is, how do you know, like, you know, like, let's say they'll say, like, oh, you know, the giants and the Nephilim are the ones that want, like, transhumanism and cybernetics and all this stuff. But what if the truth is just that, like, just like how Jesus, you know, became a religion, how you know something based on science and technology won't end up replacing that? And then the generation before that, of course, is going to say that the new thing is evil. It's like, how if let's say if Moses was real, okay, and you're the Pharaoh, you're going to say that Moses is the bad guy. You know what I mean? Because it's like, it's the new idea. You know, it's like, oh, now it's like, oh, you can't have slaves anymore. Right? You know, even though, like, you know, according to what they've actually said is that they didn't really have slaves, and it's open-ended upon whether people from Israel were really even in Egypt at that time. And, like, they did have slaves, but they were probably not Jewish slaves, and they probably used unionized labor for the pyramids, right?
Yeah.
You know, okay, I've heard some things, like some theories that could point at the possibility that maybe there were Israelites in Egypt at the time, but they just can't prove it, right? But it's so open-ended that you don't know.
Yeah.
But either way, it's probably just a myth.
Dia last night said, you know, there's evidence like the Bible points to it happening, but what about the fact that a pharaoh at that time might have engaged in a propaganda campaign to, you know, wipe all the hieroglyphs and wipe all the history out that they were ever there because they were ashamed or trying to cover up a crime or whatever?
Well, the thing is that I've seen some videos where they talk about the fact that the plagues could have just been natural disasters and not really actually sent by a god, and that they think that it actually did happen, but, like, they can't really prove it.
All natural phenomena, it feels to me,
right.
is just like God. Is like, you know, like a tornado happens. I mean, that's pretty scary. I'd blame that on an angry God. If a cyclone came through and tore up my village, I'd be pretty like, wow, I pissed off God. You know, if I was just about to harvest my crops and a million gazillion locusts came through and caused a great famine, I would say, damn, shouldn't have pissed off great God Almighty.
Right, there you go, because that would be like the only answer that you would have at the time.
Yeah, why not? I
Right,
mean, it makes sense.
right. Like, you know, no, but like, but the thing is, though, is like, you know, what I'm just trying to say, though, like, you know, I'm not sure if it's true, but I could believe that, like, you know, if the astrological age thing is true, okay? Let's say, like, the planet, like, you know, moves through the solar system. The gravity of the other planets could probably affect the Earth's core in some sort of way. The sun maybe, the gravity of the sun could be affected in some sort of way that we don't understand yet. So suddenly, like, you know, people start to think slightly differently from how they used to think before. And then, like, you know, culture changes at the same time. So you just have a jump from one system to another. And then a bunch of people write like religious, like, bullshit about it. And then that becomes the next religion because it just fits with the thinking of that time period. Like, you know, so like, I mean, the astrological argument could be total bunk. Like, it could be not true. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the funny thing is, it's like a lot of the things with the Moses and Abraham story is that there's theories that Abraham actually means Aries the ram. And that, like, the story of, like, how Abraham had to kill his son.
Yep.
There's theories that it was not like an actual story. It's just an allegory for like the beginning of another astrological age. So, like, you know how they have the golden calf, which represents the bull god.
Yeah.
So now it's possible that the bull god could have been associated with Taurus. And so now remember I said that in the Sumerian mythology, it was the god Enlil that did the flood.
Yep.
And he was called the Lord of the Command. The bull god was called Lord. Okay? So now it's like, you know, if you're a Christian and you're living today and you read the Bible and it says Nimrod was a mighty hunter before the Lord, right? You're going to assume that it's your God that they're talking about, right? But what if Lord actually means another God and you're just like and you're interpreting it the wrong way because the Bible could just be an entire complete mess? You know, based off of Sumerian mythology and other religions.
Yep, this is what I was saying to the lady last night. I feel
right.
It's just pass the parcel, and if the gods are vying for power through this mechanism, so you know, the further you go back, the more you realize there's continuity, and you're probably worshipping the first ever deity that was conceived.
Right, and so then it's like, you know, that's what I'm trying to say is like, you know, Palpatine could be the bull god.
Sure.
You understand what I'm trying to say?
Sure.
It's like, and like, you know, like from a realistic conception, you know, it's like, you know, you could say that, okay, this god is not necessarily good or evil, but it's, you know, represents a set of ideas and way of thinking, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, you know, the thing is like, you know, like when you observe like the Republicans and how they behave, you sometimes start to wonder, you go, you know, like, you know, because then I think about like the god in Transformers, right? Like the guy Unicron, right? And I go, it sounds like they're worshiping him. like I mean, like, you know, in the sense that like the stance on abortion, the rate, like certain issues about race and all that stuff. And so now the funny thing is that I didn't think that there was a connection between this, and like I'm not saying that it could be correct, but you know how like they have that the god of Saturn was Cronus, right? The Greek god. Apparently they said that Cronus is associated with the bull god. And so now, like, you know, the thing with Palpatine makes perfect sense because, you know, in mythology they say that when Cronus was defeated and thrown in Tartarus, that he fled to Italy and he became the Roman god Saturnus, and that the Roman Empire was his fault. And then, like, you know, you're like thinking, oh my god, the First Order. Because, like, you know how they say that Palpatine created the First Order after the original Empire was destroyed?
Yeah.
And they that they have those robots that have his face on them that give out the order to destroy all the planets and kill most of, just to damage, cripple the empire, because the empire shouldn't exist if he's dead, because
Yeah.
then it means that its followers failed him or something.
Yeah.
And it sounds like the flood. It sounds like the flood.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not saying the flood actually happened, but it sounds like, how in the Sumerian mythology they also have the flood, and they say that it was Enlil that did the flood,
Yeah.
right? And so now Vader's supposed to be Gilgamesh. It's like saying that, he served the emperor, the empire fell, and then he used the flood to destroy all of it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and then a few centuries later, you have the Babylonians, and then you have the Romans. And then you're just like,
Yeah.
So then it's like kind of like, you kind of think about it and you go, oh my God, man. Like, I was talking about one of my friends who's even more atheist than I am. And I'm like, I freaking convinced him, and he goes, oh my God. He goes, I never realized it. Star Wars is a movie about God and Jesus killing everyone who rebels against God.
Yeah. 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 I like this idea that Palpatine portrays the God of the Old Testament because, okay, you're right. He did give life to, let's say, Anakin, right? So he has a life-giving ability, but he didn't ultimately create the whole universe. But his main idea, the main thing that he did was manipulated people, warped people's minds, and controlled things, and was very destructive, and which fits perfectly with the characteristics of the God of the Old Testament.
Exactly. There you go, and that's why I find it funny. I go I say to myself, I go, wait a minute. How do we know they're not talking about God and nobody's figured it out?
Yeah, yeah. No, it's really interesting. We should move on. Whoa, sorry.
I don't want to offend Christians by saying it because it's a matter of perspective. And then the other issue too is that the Bible is a chopped up mess. So his brother was Enki, who actually warned the people about the flood.
Yeah.
And so the probability is that if Christianity really is just evolved from the Sumerian mythology, you could have that the good aspects of God could be based off of another God, and the evil aspects of God could be based on another God. And then it would just confuse everything because you wouldn't know who's doing what and why. And then you could have 20 different religions worshiping the same God and just worshiping him under different moral values and not even realizing that they could be worshiping a completely different God.
Yeah.
You could be thinking, oh, I'm worshiping the God who's good, and you end up realizing that you're worshiping the God who's racist and demands mass genocide. And would you realize it? You know what I mean? Would you realize it? You know what I mean? Because if the consumption is that God is always right and he always knows what he's doing, and that he's always correct, and that he has a plan, so when something bad happens, there must be a good reason for it.
I'm so bored
and then
that.
It's like,
what is his plan?
Right,
his plan seems like a mess. It's a messy plan.
Right, exactly. And so there's only two possibilities. Either he doesn't exist and people are stupid, or there's several gods who all disagree with each other, or there's some invisible force manipulating everything that is actually even fighting against itself.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Those are the only
the
only
fact
reasonable
that life
answers.
Yeah, the fact that life exists is nuts in itself, and I don't know. There's a couple of metaphysics, conceptions of reality and why, life exists, and is it a god or a plethora of gods, or is it built out of a random number generator, or a nature absorbs a void, or we all are living in simultaneous realities that fulfill every dimensional spectrum. There's so many possibilities, but if we are stuck in the God universe that happens to be the plane that we're on, like I said, like last night on the show, you know, if I was God, I would have probably written a better book than the
Yeah,
Bible.
exactly,
Like really,
exactly.
it's
That's one of the reasons why it's like, you eventually, like, the more educated you become and the more you question religion, you start to say, like, how can you believe in this religion because it's such a badly written book? It's like
yeah,
bad literature.
yeah, yeah.
It's like, the myths also don't even make any, like, sense unless you actually understand the allegories behind them. So to interpret them literally doesn't make sense because it's like, oh, now God is telling
And who
this guy.
invents this? Like it's like you have to be able to read and write and read this thing that's this big that was printed, you know, thanks to Gutenberg. I mean, you know, it's like it's complicated to find Jesus. Like it's like you need science and technology in order to discover who Jesus is and
Right,
disseminate that information to the people. So what's like that's what I was saying to the girl last night. I mean, are all
right.
the Aztecs and the indigenous tribes are they all going to hell because they didn't happen to read the right book? And if they aren't, then why preach the word at all? If everybody's just going to
Right.
go to heaven or an atheistic state, because they were, you know, because they didn't know, then who's the idiot who's spreading all this information around? Who's the idiot saying,
Right. It
who's
sounds
the
like a
idiot
God who's a
monk
megalomaniac.
sitting around going, you know what? If I spread this around, people then have to make a choice whether they like Jesus or are going to hell. And it's like, but
Hmm.
if I leave it, if I just hold on to this and go to my grave carrying this book and nobody knows about it, then everything's rosy, right?
Right. Well, yeah, exactly. It sounds like a God who's a megalomaniacal dictator.
Yeah, I don't like it. It annoys me.
It doesn't make any logical sense. It's
I mean,
like,
it's all the test of
it's
faith, right? Woohoo!
yeah, like, well, but that's the problem though, that like people who believe in religion end up developing a form of like rationalization for everything because it's either tied to their emotions or they have Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
I totally agree.
I don't think it's Stockholm syndrome in every situation. I think that's mostly just emotion
I
because
don't
it's like,
blame people. I don't blame people for becoming religious. I totally get it. All right,
yeah,
I totally
no,
understand. It's a big scary universe. There's a lot that can go wrong. If you have a big daddy in the sky, it makes everything a lot better.
right,
It's comforting. It's nice to, you know, hold on to that. You don't have to be scared. I probably will become religious one day because as your mortality like gets closer and closer, I mean, it's comforting. But in saying that, I mean, it's hard to do the other thing, and that's why science and technology and transhumanism is so much fun because it's actually, if this God is going to give us this universe to explore and to do what we want, and we've eaten of the tree of knowledge, which He put there, and He said, "Hey, look, here's the
mm,
tree of knowledge. You can go out and do what you want if you eat from this." I'm actually going to say, "All right, challenge accepted. Transhumanism, let's go."
right. Well, the thing is with the tree of knowledge, that probably represented the Kabbalistic pillars and the Jewish Kabbalah, probably because they represent the Kabbalah as a tree.
Yeah,
And so
yeah,
what they
I've seen that.
basically, right. So what they're basically really talking about in that story is that they're not really, see, like the thing is like if you interpret it like from an in between the lines type of way, like, it's not a story that's supposed to be logical for like the treatise of a universal creator of an entire species. It makes more sense as a story that is only talking about like if you're within a small culture that has certain types of teachings and knowledge, and they tell you that, oh, you can't learn that knowledge until we approve of you learning it, and it has to be kept a secret from you, and we can't like let you know that, then it actually makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, that
But
does
then,
make
like,
sense.
if it, right, but if it was like, like, oh, it's the guy who created the whole universe, and he's decided that you need to be stupid and docile, otherwise he's gonna, like, kill you or like punish you or torture you, then it doesn't really make any sense.
Yeah, because
Like
like
then it becomes a silly story.
a lot of the primitive sort of innovations in religion, you know, having the priestly class and you know this sacred class and stuff is resource acquisition. You know, They thought, hey,
Right.
like if I sit in here and sacrifice lambs while the peasants all run around and do actual hard work of building pyramids all day, I'm going to choose the nice robes and the lambs and the big banquets every night over the other option, which is being hot and sweaty. I don't know, shifting bricks around or whatever they were doing. I'm going to go
Right.
with I'm going to be a priest every single time. So how do you do that? You create a class of people who essentially perpetuate a mimetic that formulate a resource acquisition that's integrated with a power mechanism, and the power mechanism is control
Right.
over the mind, right? And so then
Right.
then it becomes your job to devise stories and myths and legends and punishments and everything in order to control that society. And you know how it is with the memes on the internet. You know how the information is disseminated. It's not a great leap to go from Anki or from some Sumerian god to Yahweh. It's not a great leap.
No, it's not. And it's like even like Enki was also known as Ea, like which sounds similar to Yah, like in Yahweh.
Yeah.
So it's entirely possible that they're really actually talking about the same deity, and they just start pronouncing it differently, and
And
then they
Christians
just
will be upset. Christians will be upset if they ever found out definitively that they've been worshiping those gods. I've often wondered that, whether
Mhm.
what if Jesus was hypothetically in full knowledge that he was serving that god, and that he just kind of brushed over the fact that he knew that. I mean, what if he knows that it's yeah, if it's Ra or if it's Enki or if it's the Sumerian god, and he said, well, we say Amen right at the end of the prayer, every prayer.
Right,
Um,
like Ram.
yeah. So if he was in full knowledge of this, but he wanted to perpetuate it, I mean, what if Jesus is the greatest trickster of them all in that way?
Go.
Would Christians would Christians would go nuts, right? They'd live in denial, like.
They wouldn't be able to handle it. And then also, like he says that he's the bright morning star, which is the planet Venus, which used to be called Lucifer. And like most gods, like used to be said to live on those planets,
That's
and
why
that's
they're all
all
called
based
after.
on the
Yeah.
like the basis of like Marduk. He lived on the planet Venus, or he lived on the planet Jupiter. And so like he's saying that he's the bright morning star, which is like him mind fucking with people and saying that I'm the same thing like Marduk because I'm from up there, and like that's why you had to worship me. And none of you really realize that it's just a planet with a lot of smog that reflects the light from the sun that's filled with acid and 400 degrees Celsius heat. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
But the
yeah,
thing
yeah.
is, too, is that, I mean, the other thing is that, like, see, that's another thing that the Christians have screwed up is that Lucifer is really actually the planet Venus. Or the planet Jupiter, like when you would see them in the daytime, in the morning, like you just see the star, the reflection of the light shining off of the planet makes it look like a star. And so the thing is that like the goddess of love, like and war, like in Nana, is the planet Venus. And like how like they have the story that she goes to the underworld. That's because of the Sidonic cycle of the planet, where the planet starts to become less visible as it goes far away. And so ancient people used to think that the goddess went to the afterlife and that she was killing people and shit like that. And then they changed it into a story where she dies because her sister, who's supposed to be deaf, kills her when she's in the afterlife. But the thing is, that's interesting though, is here's how you can connect all this to astrology, is that Venus is associated both with like Libra and Taurus. And so like, Inanna would probably be like a goddess that's either associated with the moon or associated with the planet Venus. So she would represent Taurus, and her sister, who's supposed to be deaf, would represent Libra, because when you die, you go to hell, heaven or hell to get judged. And now, like they have that Hela ruled over the Niflheim, and they said that was a smoky place. And then you have the goddess Kali who destroys evil, and Libra is supposed to be the scales of justice,
Wow.
right? Or
Yeah.
Zeus's daughter was Nemesis, and she always made sure that everything was balanced. You couldn't have it too good and you couldn't have it too bad, right?
Mm.
And so like the thing is that like this is the area where where religion started to confuse me, because it's like, first I'm thinking it's all made up, it's all bullshit, none of it's real, it's just made up to mentally mindfuck people and everything. And then you start thinking, wait a minute, you know what? If the planets associate with astrological signs, and if people are always making planets into gods, it makes sense that death would be Libra, and it would make sense that the goddess of love would be Taurus, right? And so the thing is, it's like you start thinking and you go like, oh my God, you know what? Like it kind of does make sense. Like maybe it's bullshit, but it kind of does make sense. And so like, like the Statue of Liberty, right?
Sure.
Like, right. Like, same thing, like Lady Liberty, right? And then like, the story of Persephone, how she's supposed to also be that she was taken to the underworld by Hades.
Yeah.
And like even these stories are all based on what they're talking, just based on the planets.
So
they're just talking about,
ancient navigators on boats, right? They used the stars to navigate. That's how they got around. I mean, they still do. But there's GPS and other things now, innovations. Map systems and things. But ancient navigators used stars and planets, I guess, to navigate around.
mm-hmm.
Do you think that religion, in a way, regardless of whether or not it was designed this way, I mean, was just an ancient map of the planets? I mean, that got out, a story that got out.
Most of it on the planets. I think that a large
it's
amount
ancient
of it
astronomy in a metaphor, conveyed as a metaphor, as a parable.
Yeah. That's mostly it's mostly astrological signs and planets, at least the ones that they could see.
Because if you don't have, okay, all right, this is interesting. Okay, if you have a priestly class or a learned class that can a very limited, 500, 600, I don't know how many people in a civilization, but a small 10,000 even, I don't know, but however many people can read in that civilization, read the hieroglyphics or read the ancient texts or read, the majority of the population isn't going to have access to that science. So the only way you can convey, and they did this, when Alexander, for example, Alexander the Great, he went and conquered Persia, right? And he went all the way over to almost India. And if you go to those places in India, almost in India, say Iran or Pakistan, there's people today that still bang the drums and sing songs about Alexander the Devil who came and conquered the land. They still pass those songs down. So if you're a scientist in those ancient times and you wanted to tell people about how the planets move and what they're doing, in terms of astronomy, a story might convey that well. You say, that one's called Venus, and she does this, and the way to remember it and to pass that on is that that she goes down to the bad place, and then she'll come up again in a few months.
Just like Jesus dying is just basically the sun disappearing for 3 days. He walks on water because the sun reflects on water. And why does he turn water into wine? Because when you grow grapes in your yard, they get energy from the sun to make sugar through photosynthesis. That's why they eat bread and wine, because they're saying it's the blood of the sun.
Sure.
Basically sun vampires.
Sun, yeah, and sun worship, I was talking to another gentleman as well, and he said, and he's a Christian, and he was going, yeah, the more I look at it, the deeper I go, it all comes back to sun worship. It all it's round and round and round to sun worship. It's all sun worship.
Well, the thing is, though, is that what they used to say was as above, so below. So the issue is that it's probable that they were getting a myth of an individual or of several different types of people, and then saying this guy is the same like the sun.
Okay.
Like saying he's that great. Like,
Yeah.
so it's like, so now you see, like when you watch a lot of these shows and movies that they have today, it's like the hero is the sun. And the villain is usually like the planet Saturn or something like that, because Saturn is the opposite of the sun. So when you have like Superman, like, when he fights General Zod, it's the sun versus the planet Saturn. And then like when he fights Darkseid, he's fighting Nimrod. When he's fighting Lex Luthor, he's fighting a Lester Crowley who doesn't believe in Jesus. like I mean, a lot of people say, "Oh no, he's not based off of Crowley," but like, okay, like Luthor's a scientist, so he doesn't seem like he's based on Crowley.
Yeah.
But there's some stuff about it with Luthor that would make you understand him being based off of a Lester Crowley and why it makes sense. And like the thing is where they get the name Lex Luthor, Lex Lucifer. So now the issue is, this is where it gets really goddamn twisted, okay? This is what really creeped me out from like going into the rabbit hole, okay? Now, if there's always a hero that's based off of the sun, right?
Sure.
And there's always a guy who's his opposite. I'm not talking about, like, it's only like the really big, bad type of villain that's Saturn, okay? But there's always a common villain that he always fights. Like, Superman fights Lex Luthor, right? Spider-Man fights the Green Goblin. And you notice that they're always dressed in green. Green and purple, right? And the hero's red and blue. Because red and blue are like two of the colors on the Kabbalistic pillars. The severity is red and mercy is blue. And Superman's red, blue, and yellow. Okay? And so now, the thing is, they even have the color green on the pillars. Okay? So they're not basing the colors off of the United States like everyone thinks. They're based off of the Kabbalah pillars. And the thing is that the reason why there's always a Lucifer type of villain is because there's only one other man other than Jesus who has secretly been seen as a Christ. You want to know who that is? King Nebuchadnezzar the second. So now, what there's like, the story of Lucifer's fall, okay, was supposed to both represent the Sidonic cycle of Venus, moving away and becoming less visible. But it was also like, some people have theorized that it was a paraphrasing of when King Nebuchadnezzar got syphilis. And the thing is that, like, so he's the fallen angel. Because how come suddenly, okay, now also, the storm god Baal had an angel called Atar who used to work for him, who tried to overthrow him. And when he failed to defeat Baal, he went to rule the underworld. So now in Transformers, you have Megatron and you have Starscream. So they're saying that Megatron is Baal, and they're saying that Starscream is Atar. And then what ends up happening in the Transformers 1986 movie? Megatron gets turned into Galvatron by Unicron, who's a giant Saturn-shaped planet, and then he kills Starscream, and Starscream becomes a ghost. Like, there you go. And so, what's the funny thing? The storm god Baal was actually adopted by the Semitic god El, who represents the planet Saturn. So it's like, there you go. They're basically saying it right there. Like, it's like why there's a Lucifer story. But the thing is, though, the other theory is that it was based upon King Nebuchadnezzar. And like the Bible has that God gave him mental illness, but they say that in real life, I don't know if it's true, that he had syphilis and he became mentally ill for 7 years. And so he was called the King of Kings. And then they call Jesus the King of Kings. So now you see like Mario Brothers, how they have Mario and Luigi. You notice that Mario is red and blue and that Luigi is green and blue and he's player number 2. Apparently there's a theory that it's the Jesus and Lucifer brothers. And also the other thing is too is that there's a theory too that the guys who made Mario Brothers were part of the Communist Party, and that they made Mario to look like Stalin. And the thing is that the mushroom even looks like a mushroom that grows in Russia. And now the whole thing with Mario, okay, why is he called Mario? The theory is that it means Mary-O, which means he's the son of Mary. And the thing is that Luigi is tall and skinny, while Mario's short and fat. And there's an episode of like the cartoon that they used to do where they would have them, like, you know, live action actors at the end of every episode. And there's this episode where Luigi's possessed by this like witch, and he starts doing everything backwards, like left, like the opposite, you know, like to say that he's like the opposite of Jesus. So now, like, you know, some of these cartoons, like, you know, like they have a cartoon called Reboots. Do you remember that? It was in the 90s where like they were inside a computer, and they have this main villain who's a virus called Megabyte. And so now it's like everything in that, it's like he wants to get access to the supercomputer, you know, which is like the story of Satan falling from heaven and wanting to go to heaven, right? Like they have the whole story that he starts off as this virus called Kilobyte. He gets captured by the Guardians in the supercomputer. He gets upgraded when they were going to delete him by whoever created him. And they have Bob as like a cadet, and he's like, and they're going to delete him. And he's like, you don't know what made him this way, like, you know, and all that stuff. Because he's like supposed to be like Jesus, you know, he's young and naive, right? And like, you know, the other cadets, like, she's like saying a user made him this way, you know, like saying that God made him this way, you know, and our job is just to delete the viruses, not to question why. And so then they have that he upgrades into this virus called Gigabyte, and he kills the female cadet, and Bob is the only one that survives. And so like the thing was that when he becomes Gigabyte, he has like a gold claw in his hand, which is like the scythe that Cronus has. Okay? And so then he gets, what happened was that the system mainframe, they had a guy who was in charge of the system who was similar to Carl Sagan, who was trying to build a teleportation device. And what happens is that he accidentally, when he opens the gateway command to try to find other systems, he accidentally teleports Gigabyte to mainframe. And when Gigabyte comes through the portal, his claw cuts the machine and blows up and splits them in half and turns them into megabyte and hexadecimal. And they're like one is male and one is female, right? And so hexadecimal looks like the Statue of Liberty. And megabyte, like, you know, he looks like Shiva, kind of like he has like this horned headdress. He kind of looks like Dick Cheney. You know, but like he's like a blue android, okay? And his sister, she's supposed to be crazy. And he's supposed to be the one that got all the brains, but she got all the power. So it's like saying Kali and Siva, okay? And then it's like in they have a storm god called Nurgle, who's associated with the sun and with Pluto and Mars. So now Bob, you know, they're like making him like the god Apollo or like Perseus, right? He's the god of light and truth. You know, he's the good guy, right? He comes to mainframe to fight Megabyte and to protect the system. But Megabyte is his opposite, because it's like Bob is Perseus and Megabyte is Nurgle. Okay? And so like the thing is that ancient cultures, what they used to do is if a planet, like, you know, this is kind of based off of the Velikovsky conspiracy crap, so I'm not saying it's necessarily accurate. But if a god of their culture that was based on a planet, if something bad happened that they would associate with that god, they would say it was the other culture's version of that god. So it's like, you know, it wasn't Perseus who did it. It was Nurgle who did it. So like, you know, like basically what they're saying is that the female guardian and Bob are Perseus and Athena, and that Megabyte is Nurgle, and that hexadecimal is the Medusa. Like, you know, like Because he even has a virus. She creates a virus in one episode that she tricks Megabyte into stealing, and he thinks it was a weapon. That was called the Medusa bug. And the thing was that with her insanity was made a lot of sense once you start rewatching the show as an adult. Like, because when you're young, you wouldn't think about it. Like, she would always have like a crack on her mask. But the thing was that was what made her mentally ill. But the thing was that she would just go from being violent to being nice. Like, you know, like balance, like the scales, like 1 minute you're mean, 1 minute you're nice. So the thing was, there was only one person that she was always nice to. She was always nice to Bob. She would abduct him and start dancing with him. And then it's like she would only be mean when it was something that deserved to have something done to it. But you know how justice is blind? So now the thing is like, what they're saying is that Bob is pure because he's naive. He doesn't understand that viruses have to be killed. Like the other Guardians, he thinks that they could be reprogrammed, right? So it's like Jesus Christ. I don't need to kill you. I just need to reform you. We need to figure out why the user made you this way. You know, like Jesus Christ. I have to convert you to my religion. You know? And so the thing is like hexadecimal is like the scales. She senses that he's like pure, so she starts dancing with him, and she's always in love with him. And then it's like there's an episode where they all have to team up because the web is like this dimension that has all these creatures in it, and one of the web creatures came to mainframe and opened the portal. So what happens is that like they make this weapon because Megabyte took control of all the sectors of the computer that used to make weapons, and they get his sister to power it, right? And they're gonna and the good guys are gonna use the weapon to close the web, but he betrays Bob, and he throws Bob into the web before they close it, you know, which is like crucifying Jesus, right? You know, he smiles at him, he pushes the button, they trap him in this thing, and they shoot him into space, and the sister helps him to win in it. And the gun and the gun looks like a giant penis, and they call it the hardware, but it also looks like a cross, right? And so like the thing is that when they get like, why did she help Megabyte in that episode? Because the issue is that justice is blind. He would lose in every single episode. He's the bad guy. He always loses, right? But justice is blind. So the problem is that she had to help him to win because he always loses. And then like in the end, it's like, you know, when they win, it's like the next season gets all serious. And what happens is that they're going to try to get like the principal office of the computer to surrender and everyone to surrender. And then she goes nuts and says, the principal office is just screaming to be destroyed. And she turns the gun on it, and she was going to destroy the whole system. And Megabyte's like, if you destroy the principal office, we will all be obliterated. But what is the point of the logic behind it? It's the like main building with the government for the good guys. So it never gets destroyed. So therefore, because it never gets destroyed, it's not morally just that it can't get destroyed. So she has to destroy it. So technically, she's not really crazy. You know what I mean? Like, okay, fine. Like they cure her of her mental illness later on, and like they end up finding out that she was not like really like evil like Megabyte. It was just more that she was like, you know, associated with chaos. So she would just make trouble whenever she would get bored. Right? And so Megabyte's more like the guy who has the big army. He has all the infected. Like they would have these people called binomes. Like they're ones and zeros, right? And he infects all of them and turns them into an army. And in the first episode, he wants Bob to do him a favor. And then like, you know, Bob ends up like, you know, just pretending to like, you know, join him and goes into his fortress, and like you see all these like a whole army, like thousands of guys, you know, like. And so the thing is how did they beat him in the end? Is like when Bob was thrown into space, one of the kids that looked up to him, like, you know, becomes the Guardian. He loses in a game. He gets trapped in the games, and then he finds Bob and he brings him back. and they had like a key tool that they would use. The Guardians would have a key tool that would fix stuff in the system. So what happens is that he merges with the key tool and he becomes all shiny, and they go back to mainframe and it's all destroyed because Megabyte tried to control his sister as a weapon, and she broke free and she like ran havoc on the whole system, and then Megabyte had nowhere to go. So he attacks the principal office and he takes control of it. And so the whole system's all destroyed, like, kind of basically like what they talk about in the Bible, like the end times. And then, like, of course, they get rid of Megabyte and he gets taken through, like, he's trying to escape to another system, and they switch the portal to the web and they trap him in the web, and like the tentacles grab him and pull him in. And now I'm like saying, like, I started saying to my brother, I go, wait a minute, he's supposed to be Nebuchadnezzar. And then he's like, and my brother's like, what? Does that mean that the tentacles of the web creature are syphilis? So, like, it's like saying that, like, that, like, the king represents the opposite of Jesus. You know what I mean? Like because he rules like a kingdom, like he thinks that it's better to do things this way than that way.
Yeah, and Jesus, well, he kind of rules with an iron fist if you think about it.
Right.
But yeah, he wants to be king of kings as opposed to king of somewhere.
Right. And the funny thing is that what the Jews believed with their prophecy for the Lion of Judah was that the planet Jupiter would give the sign of when the Christ would be born, when the Messiah would be born. So now you see in Star Wars how Qui-Gon, they find Anakin as a kid in the desert, and they believe that he's like the chosen one, and they take him to the Jedi. It's almost like as if they're getting some kid off of the desert that was born in a virgin birth and bringing him to the Messianic rabbis and saying, is this the guy that the Force said would be born of prophecy to defeat the Roman Empire? And then what happens? When they cut him up, it's like, you were the chosen one. You were supposed to destroy the Sith, not join them, right? And so now, notice that the prophecy that the Jews had was that the planet Jupiter would give a sign in heaven of when he would be born, similar to how Abraham was born to defeat Nimrod by like a sign in the heavens. And that then it's like he was supposed to defeat the Roman Empire. But then what really happened is that, they just created, we just have a story of a guy who gets executed. And then the Roman Empire converts to Catholicism. And doesn't that sound a lot like what we were saying about Star Wars?
Yeah, like massively. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, Constantine.
And then Vader.
It was very quick. It went from paganism to Christianity at light speed once Constantine got there.
Right, because of money and power. But notice that Anakin gets cut up, right, and burnt. And then they turn him into a cyborg and they rise him up on that thing, almost like as if they're creating the cross and putting the cross up to a wall.
Sure.
And the other thing, too, is that, in the old biblical stories, they have the Ark of the Covenant gets put next to the statue of Dagon when the Philistines stole the covenant.
Mm-hmm.
And the statue of Dagon falls, and the hand and the legs break off. And on Vader, it was the hand and the legs that get cut off.
Yeah,
right?
Makes sense. Yeah.
Right. Like, what they're saying is that he's not alive anymore. He's dead. So he no longer represents anything because he's not living. He's dead. He's an idol. So it's like saying that he became idol worship. It's like they're basically telling you that he became the cross. And now the funny thing is that the cross is associated with the planet Saturn. And Saturn actually has a symbol of a cross with a scythe. And they actually have pictures of like Father Time holding a cross with a scythe on it. And so it's like, it's this, They say that Satan was the one who crucified Jesus. Right? And so you're just like, like if the emperor is supposed to be Cronus, right? It's like he put Jesus on the cross. It's like like that's how messed up those films are. And then like the funny thing is that RoboCop, Paul Verhoeven said that it was supposed to be an American Jesus. So, only that he uses guns. But you notice that he's a cop. Detroit is privatized and owned by OCP, and they turn him into a cyborg. And then it's like Dick Jones is like number 2, which is like saying that he's Lucifer, and like the old man is supposed to be God. And like like I used to tell people, I go, I think that this movie is based off of Greek mythology, and that they're trying to say that the old man of OCP is Zeus or something, right? Like I couldn't figure it out. And people would laugh at me and go, no, man, you're just like thinking stuff, And then the guy comes out and says it was about Jesus. So like how there's the theory of Caesar's Messiah, that they just embellish the stories of the rabbis who were like trying to protest to go up against the Roman Empire, but that then they quelled the rebellion and then they created a fake Bible story and they altered the biblical scriptures to make it a nonviolent resistance. And you notice how Anakin attacks the temple and that Anakin looks like Caesar Borgia? And so like now, like, there's a theory that there was a rabbi who betrayed the other rabbis and joined with one of the generals that was trying to quell the uprising of the Jewish people against the Roman Empire, and that he gave them the information on how to write the books. Like how to rewrite the scriptures. Now, mind you, it's not confirmed that it's actually true. So now, you notice how Vader has midichlorians? Now, you can only be a Jew through your mom. Okay? But what does the mother have that gets passed on to the next generation? Mitochondria. So the midichlorians, the mitochondria, right? So it's almost like, like apparently the Jews have a book called the Zohar, where they believe that Jesus was the son of a Roman soldier and that his mother was Jewish. And so now Palpatine impregnates a woman who has a virgin birth. Like as if they're saying that Palpatine is a Roman general or soldier who impregnated a Jewish woman. Right? And so like now, like, the thing is, when you think about it with RoboCop, okay, he's a cop who wants to help people, who's just doing his job. He's not a bad guy, but he was taken by an evil corporation and turned into a cyborg, and they faked that he was dead. And the old man wants to rebuild all of Detroit after buying it privately, which is almost like the Romans taking over Israel and then wanting to pacify it. And what happens in RoboCop 3? In RoboCop 3, the old man of OCP starts building condos and buildings and starts kicking out all the poor people, and then RoboCop rebels against them and starts defending all the poor people, like as if they're talking about the second coming of Jesus. So then it's like, I just end up realizing, I go, fuck, if RoboCop can be Jesus, then you can't get rid of religion. Because I'm just like, I go like, even if I can scientifically prove that religion is not real and it's made up, 100 years from now, they'll come up with some other story.
You think that this story, for some reason, this story is inevitable? That there's something about humans that they love this story because it's got all the elements of humanity. It's got power, it's got love, it's got emotion, it's got family, it's got dad versus son versus interdimensional power, there's something about this story that's just going to repeat ad
Yeah,
infinitum and take
yeah.
new new meaning. It's like a cheat sheet for anybody who's out there who wants to write a quick script on a movie, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. It's a cheat sheet for writing a movie. That's exactly what it is. And it's like like I never figured it out right away. I just kept analyzing stuff, right? And I
Yeah.
keep saying to myself, they're basing things off of stuff in these films and movies, and everyone says that they're not. And I go, nah, man, they have to be basing it off of something. And it's like, it's just like you can't figure it out. Like I spent years. And it's like I started telling, like back in the day when I was young, I didn't know what they were basing it off of, right? So it's like you couldn't really tell. But then it's like, like you start once I started figuring out that religion is connected to astrology, that's when it started finally making sense.
Yeah.
Because I go, wait a minute, all these cartoons are astrotheology. Like they're all talking about parallels with with the planets and the sun and the stars, and and then I go, wait, if the hero is always the sun, then what planet is the bad guy supposed to be? You get what I mean, right?
Yeah,
Like,
totally.
what's the bad
Totally.
guy supposed to be? Right, and so now why does Agent Smith get some of Neo's code? Because it's the same thing as Megabyte. What happened to Megabyte when he was thrown in the web?
Yeah.
Well, before he was thrown in the web, when he shot Bob into space, shot him into the web, he stole Bob's key tool and he crushed it and he threw it to the ground. He apparently accidentally absorbed some of Bob's code. So what happened was that when they come back and they beat him and they throw him into the web, because the web degrades your body, apparently, because he had some of Bob's guardian code, he only became partially degraded. Like when Bob was stuck in the web, he became partially degraded, so he didn't look normal anymore. His body looked like it was all messed up, right? So now the thing was, the same thing happened to Megabyte. But because he absorbed some of Bob's code, he evolved and he became a Trojan virus. So what happens is that they have a guy who's like a surfer, who's like a search engine, and he accidentally finds another Bob inside the web and he brings it to mainframe. And so, like, how, like, they say that the Antichrist will take the temple? Well, what happens is that, like, how they mentioned that there's the bride of Christ? Well, the guy who was the guy who owned the system that created the gateway command was called Wellman Matrix. And he was like the command.com of the system. But because he was killed, his daughter, who was named Dot, became the command.com. And now the funny thing is, though, is that apparently, here's how they connect the whole thing of God in the whole story. Because when you get blown up or destroyed in the system, okay, either by like a game or something like that, you get turned into a null. So what happened was that Dot's father was still alive as a null. So he became this little worm that sucks energy. And apparently Megabyte would keep him as a pet and call him father. Because he's saying, that he was the one who created me, because when he created the gateway command, it split Gigabyte in half and it created me. So the thing is that everyone is following the philosophy and the wisdom of Wellman Matrix. Because Megabyte has dim memories of going to the supercomputer. He wants to build a portal to go to the supercomputer. So who would he look up to? He would look up to all of Wellman Matrix's theories, right?
Yeah.
Which is almost like as if saying that just like the other characters, he also worships God. Because people like King Nebuchadnezzar, like, they might say, oh, he was evil, he was worshiping another god. No, he's worshiping the same gods. You know what I mean? So it's like they're basically saying that he admired the guy's knowledge and wisdom so much that he considered the guy to be his father. Okay? Like, which is almost like saying that Wellman Matrix is supposed to be Enki, like the god of wisdom. Right? Where, like, they all got, like, their knowledge and their wisdom from him. That even the virus believes in God. Like, like, it's kind of silly, but you get what I mean. Like they're
Yeah.
not saying it literally. And so the thing is like, how, so the thing with Dot was that she always had a plan. Okay, she always has a plan. So now the thing is, Virgo is associated with always having a plan. Because Virgo is associated with the planet Mercury, and it's always associated with planning. So now the thing is that what happened was that after they saved the whole system and the computer rebooted, Bob was going to get married to her. But then this other Bob gets brought into mainframe, who looks like the original, who's not partially degraded, and she ends up falling in love with that Bob because he looks like the original, and it makes her forget all the horrible things that happened because like she was literally in a war against Megabyte as the head general during the whole time that Bob was gone, which is almost like saying that the church is fighting against Satan. Right, like you get what I mean. Like she's supposed to represent the church, like Jesus' church.
Yep.
So now why are they having this whole story that Megabyte almost gets married to her is to represent the corruption of the church. That, like, like how like that they're basically saying that the church was corrupted by Satan or something like that, which is actually in the Revelations Bible, that the church becomes corrupted by the devil, right? Like, so what happens like near the end is that he gets separated from Glitch and he almost dies, and the key tools, they had all left the Guardians because there was this virus called Damien who was supposed to be based off of Inanna, like the goddess of love,
Mm.
who had infected the whole system before all of this, and it caused the key tools left the Guardians because all the Guardians had become infected, and she would like use religion to infect systems. So like kind of like almost creating the fake fake evangelical religion, and they would call it the Word, and she was really just a time virus where she was gonna like once like she infected everything, she would just like self-destruct and delete everything, right? So kind of like they're basing it off of like how now you have like the extremist fundamentalist religions suddenly like rising up in resistance to change in society, right?
Yep.
They basically did all the exact same stuff, and they have like this female virus who doesn't look evil like Megabyte or Hexadecimal, who's confused about concepts about love and everything, who's like using a religion to infect everybody, like almost like as if saying that she's like, like a fake church, you know what I mean? Right? Because like if you notice, it's like she's a virus, so it's like she's deluding people's minds. But Dot represents actual thinking and planning because like she's the command.com, so it's not the same thing. It's like one is like like becoming infected with irrational thought, and the other is like thinking according to facts and logic, right? And so the thing is like Bob tries to stop the wedding and it doesn't work, and he like fails, right? And his key tool comes off of him and goes on to the other one. And so then like and then what happens is that like he starts to change back into Megabyte because the key tool like turned them back in, like like took a part of the code from him and reveals who he is, and then goes back to Bob and turns him back to normal, and they finally figure out that like Megabyte is a Trojan virus now, and like and then at the end is like what happens is he takes control of the system again by taking control of the principal office, and he just says to them that like that this time is like you're expecting one of my speeches, Mega Frame, the new viral Don. He goes, and he's like, no, I'd hate to disappoint you. This is about revenge, like, and he's like saying viruses are predatory by design, like it is time for me to follow my function. Prepare yourselves for the hunt. Because like they're showing the concept of like, Dot represents the actual religion, right?
Yep.
Bob represents like the light and the truth. And like, they're showing that Megabyte, he was refraining from just being a normal virus that would just go around killing people. and instead had this plan to infect people or go to the supercomputer, because he was not following his function. He was following he was following what he learned from like Dot's father. You know, like kind of thing. So I started realizing, I go, wait a minute, they based all of this off of religion. They're like basically saying that there's two sun gods, like two sun parallels, right? Because Nergal was associated with the sun and with Mars and Pluto. Okay? But he was seen as a plague god. Apollo was also seen as a plague god, right? But also a god of medicine. You know, and like Bob is supposed to be Apollo, and Megabyte is supposed to be Nergal. So now, when Neo defeats Agent Smith, right? Agent Smith absorbs some of Neo's code, and he ends up becoming the opposite of Neo, because the architect needed to balance the system by creating an opposite to Neo. So he puts a piece of Neo's code into Agent Smith. And what they say in the film, like the Oracle says in the movie, that the architect, which was supposed to be God, like the old man with the white hair, that looks like a psychiatrist, that his job is to balance everything. And so because like Neo had finally like awakened and, you know, like started like, you know, having his abilities, he had to create an opposite of Neo in order to balance everything. So he had to get a portion of Neo's code and put it on Agent Smith in order to like balance the whole entire system. And the thing is, that's what like the Oracle says. Like she goes, that man does not understand choice. His whole purpose is just to balance the system. He goes like, you know, he just sees an equation, he tries to balance it, and he accounts for everything. Like, you know, and like, you know, Neo's like, and what's your purpose? And she's like, to unbalance the system, right? And so like, you know, like what they're basically saying is that the architect does not understand free will or choice. He only understands to like everything as like a set of numbers, and he's like saying, okay, that happened, so I need to do this. That happened, so I need to do this, right?
Yeah.
And what does he admit in that movie? He admits that Neo was like not an actual savior. He goes that you're part of an anomaly that I have been trying to get rid of. And so like he basically says to him that what I've done is I got all the junk code in the system that keeps falling apart, and I just put it all on you. And so it's like he's basically saying that like your function is to be a false savior for the people so they could feel better about themselves. So that way they have the illusion of free will, and they don't realize that I'm the one who's deciding what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Like, you know, if they see that there's a savior, they think that they have free will.
Yeah, that's
right.
Yeah, that's true. That makes a lot of sense, actually.
And so the thing is, like, a lot of people didn't like those films because they made him talk really pretentiously. That's almost difficult to understand what he was saying. But it's like, you know, the problem is that he thinks that he's perfect because he's a code programmer and he created the Matrix, right? So he thinks that he has no flaws because everything he does is within balance. So he could never, ever be wrong. So, of course, he's going to talk pretentiously and say, like, you know, I invented the Matrix. You're part of an anomaly that I can't solve. So I created the purpose of the one to give an illusion of free will. So I just threw all the junk code on the anomaly of the system, you know? And like he even says that there were 6 matrices in the film. He goes that the Matrix is older than you know. Like, this is the 6th version. Like, what he's saying is that civilization has been destroyed more than once.
Yeah.
He's basically the same thing as Palpatine, but they're just presenting it in a different way.
Yeah. All right, Frank. Well, I got to wrap it up there because I got to run. I got to go do stuff. But hey, look, thank you for coming on Detonation, and we'll talk again real soon, and we'll get you back on another panel because I want to talk to you about AI as well and transhumanism as well, because this whole religion and movies and, you know, hidden themes, you know, in literature and you know, parables, and it's all extremely interesting, and we could do another show on it if you want, really soon, because I'm enthralled. This astronomy, religion, you know, mainstream cultural crossover is fascinating. It's really good, and you've got it down pat over there. So thank you so much for enlightening us on that. I'm going to go and rewatch this episode actually, you know, very soon,
Mhm.
to rethink about all this stuff, especially, you know, the megabyte. That sounds really interesting. I haven't seen it. It just reminds me of, I just sort of, because I haven't seen it, I just sort of replaced it with the, because I'm big on Tron, so I sort of just put Tron in there.
Well, it's almost the same thing. They did the same thing with Megatron. He's pretty much based off of King Nebuchadnezzar as well.
Yeah,
Like even gets turned into Galvatron, and basically Galvatron is just like King Sargon.
yeah,
Like,
interesting. Yeah, and so next, yeah, let's keep talking about this, because this is super cool. But I also want to get, because I also know you're big on transhumanism, and I also want to talk about superintelligence and health span, and I also want, you know,
right.
space colonization and all that other fun stuff, you know, that we could talk about. And I know you know a lot about that stuff too, and we'll get you on another panel too sometime. So, but hey, in the
Oh,
meantime, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
no problem. You're welcome. Thank you for having me on.
No,
Thanks.
no, no problem. I love Star Wars. It was a good break to have, you know, have someone talk about Star Wars as well. So that's Detonation. We're putting death out of business. That's been Frank.
Mhm.
Go, if you just joined us, go and watch that episode. That's great. That's some great material in there.
Mhm.
Thank you so
I've
much.
been watching. I even watched the one about religion just right now, like a few hours ago.
Yeah, did you enjoy that?
Yeah, I saw it.
Yeah, cool. Thank you very much.
All right. Okay, you're welcome. Bye.